Welcome, everyone. Today is July 14th, 2023, and it has been a pretty explosive week. So many things happened. There was a big ruling in the crypto space where Ripple XRP was deemed a security, not a security. Big action resulting around that. And it's going to set some big precedents moving forward for the entire crypto space in the US. We had more talk of Bitcoin ETFs. Big $39 billion worth of student loans just this afternoon were announced in the US to be kind of wiped off the table. So tons of big news in the world of Bitcoin economics. And I have got a special guest on today. Luke, why don't you introduce yourself here? I don't even know where to start. You work with so many different companies and places and independently. Why don't we just let you take it away, give the audience an introduction to yourself, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so firstly, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely pumped to be joining you today and meeting you for the first time in person, breaking down what I believe is probably one of the biggest weeks this week that Bitcoin has ever had in terms of news cycles. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but essentially the TLDR version of me is, my name's Luke. I'm pretty active. I work for a number of different Bitcoin-only companies. I'm full-time over at CoinBeast. We're a Bitcoin-only educational company, and I manage and direct all of the content that we publish on YouTube for them. And I suppose that's the short version. I'm just excited to get into it, my friend.
Awesome. Two of us keen on educating the world on Bitcoin. I love it. All right. First things first, a quick word from our sponsor. If you haven't already bought Bitcoin after watching me yap about it live forever, if you're in Canada, the best and the easiest place to do it is with Beaver Bitcoin. And I'll bring up the little ad here shortly, but it's a perfect tool for if you want a dollar cost average in Bitcoin, don't want to think about it and just have, 100 to 400 or how many ever dollars you want, just dollar cost averaging in a Bitcoin into a non-custodial wallet every single week. This week's show is brought to you by Beaver Bitcoin. Dollar cost averaging is the most stress-free method to enter the Bitcoin space. And if you're looking for a simplified way of buying Bitcoin in Canada without needing to rely on a custodial exchange, Beaver Bitcoin is your best bet. Beaver Bitcoin lets you set up recurring Bitcoin purchases directly from your Canadian bank account and straight into a Bitcoin address that you control. It's like a savings account in a currency that you actually want, or a Netflix subscription that doesn't suck. And if you don't want to wait to stack sats, Beaver Bitcoin supports instant non-custodial Bitcoin buying via e-transfer as well. Give it a shot today at beaverbitcoin.com. All right, Beaver Bitcoin. Nothing is more Canadian than that name, hey?
It's great.
Yeah. All right, so let's just look at a couple charts here real quick, kind of a broader market view. I always like to look at the tech index, and we actually have an interesting story on that this week. So we zoom out here to the, let's just take a look at the monthly chart here. We can see that the tech index, QQQ, the triple Qs, the big 7, Tesla, Meta, Google, whatever you want to call them, they have ripped, and they closed out the week pretty strong, a little bit of profit taking. This week, you have NVIDIA hitting new highs. You have the dollar, the DXY index, actually breaking down pretty significantly here under the 100 kind of psychological level. But the really big news this week, and I'm curious what people think in terms of how it's going to affect things, is that the NASDAQ has now deemed that the big tech stocks are too damn big. So between Microsoft and Apple, they both now make up more than about 13% of the tech index. And so what the NASDAQ has said is, hey, we have 100 stocks in our index, but 7 of them make up 50% of its balance. We're going to kind of rebalance that a little bit. And I've been talking for the last few weeks about market breadth and how basically all the gains from this year were in the top sort of 7 tech stocks: Apple, Google, Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla. And you're starting to see this week a little bit more expansion. So we saw like Coinbase this week, obviously with the crypto stuff, do really well. But other names like Zoom and Square and these other things that are in the, I call them the ARK index, essentially, for all the other 100 or so stocks are starting to pick up steam a little bit as well. But yeah, Luke, I don't know. Do you trade stocks at all? Do you watch any of this world? Or are you just focused on Bitcoin?
I used to trade it all a lot. So it wasn't until 2020 that I sold everything for Bitcoin. So I used to have a nice diversified portfolio, 20% in a business, 20% in stocks, 20% in gold and silver, and like 20% in Bitcoin. But 2020, I sold all that, went all in Bitcoin. So I do watch all this stuff, and I do love my charts. I do peep my eye at a few charts from time to time, and it's fascinating what's going on right now. Tech stocks are absolutely ripping, and everybody's confused. What is happening? You know, we're supposed to
Mhm.
be heading into a recession in the
Yeah, this
US.
is only supposed to happen in QE infinity. Like, why are these
Yeah.
doing so well, right?
Exactly. And like you mentioned right now, we have quantitative tightening going on right now in the US. So everybody's a little bit puzzled why stocks are pumping. Liquidity in the system is drawing down. And it's really interesting to see what is going on. The Dixie breaking down is probably a big causal factor. I'm personally in the camp of, stocks will continue to be pumped up for a lot longer than most people believe possible. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But I think the Dixie's a really interesting one to see that break down, because that is like Bitcoin has an inverse relationship with the Dixie for a long time. So the Dixie breaking that key support at around 100 like it has recently would suggest that Bitcoin is potentially in for at least another few weeks or a few months of bullish price action, and having this tailwind behind Bitcoin's back for the next few months could be very bullish as we lead into the Bitcoin halving in early 2024.
Yeah, so now, I mean, we have two big things, right? It's like this inevitable ETF timeline, and I think the absolute end date for a decision by the SEC is like March of next year, which is like a month before the halving. So yeah, there's a lot of correlation there. This week it was kind of interesting. Like Bitcoin had its pump yesterday in kind of I guess respect to the Coinbase or the XRP ruling, but it's kind of pulled back the whole thing this week. But to me, that more looks like just the QQQs needing to consolidate and just dragging Bitcoin down with it. We got Rad Vladdy here. He's saying that degen crypto traders want another alt season. I think the degens have all lost their money or moved along to AI. It's over, boys. Shitcoins are a dead man walking. What do you think? I kind of agree. I think that yesterday's move on XRP was kind of like, that's just great exit liquidity. And we'll see where it goes from here. But I would be, normally when you get these like gargantuan moves that pull back, let's just say 40%, you kind of just do nothing for weeks. So that's kind of where I think XRP is going to go.
Yeah.
I'm always curious, like there is this thing like the XRP army, right? And they love this coin, but I kind of wonder, okay, so you guys have been into this for how many years? What have you done with it? You know, like does the XRP army even get reached out to by Ripple Labs, or they just I don't know. I don't know. The diehard Ripple people are still in it for this long, and this coin is like under where it was in 2016. I mean, or 2017. This thing was at almost $4, and everyone's stoked because it went from 40 cents to 90 cents. I don't know.
There's some great charts out there I've seen on Bitcoin Twitter in particular that show, the XRP against Bitcoin chart. And you can kind of put the recent pump yesterday into a little bit of context. Ripple's still down like 80 to 90% against Bitcoin. And that kind of ties into my broader thesis about altcoins versus Bitcoin. Like I think Bitcoin has a total addressable market cap of $900 trillion. That's all the money in the world. Bitcoin is money. Money is a winner take all. I can't make a use case or a case for altcoins having a total addressable market cap larger than $5 trillion. And that's me being very generous and conservative to the altcoins. So I think they will continue.
Well, hey, and then let alone the flippening crowd who think that, at some point Ethereum will flip Bitcoin. I've always said like that's got to be one of the worst opportunities symmetrically at the current price, because what you're saying is that in order for Ethereum to flip Bitcoin, Ethereum would just have to outpace Bitcoin at about 2.5x. And if you think that's impossible, and by like almost all mathematical standards, like Ethereum flipping Bitcoin is near impossible in market cap size, then you're only really looking at like 2x upside versus Bitcoin, versus like so much more downside by lagging behind it. So I really don't get like the Ethereum people at this point. God bless, it's a free market. You can buy whatever you want. I'm just a guy on the internet. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, you also have the technical risk of Ethereum. So Bitcoin has not changed in 14 years, hasn't changed its rules, hasn't changed its monetary policy. You're very sure about what you've got. But with Ethereum, how many times have they changed monetary policy? I believe it's over 7. And you've got the technical risk of, it being a centralized proof of stake system that's not decentralized like Bitcoin. So I think even comparing Ethereum's price action with Bitcoin's price action is an unfair comparison, because it's not an apples to apples comparison in terms of the underlying asset.
Absolutely. And let's dive into roadkill number 1 from last cycle. Alex Mashinsky, CEO of Celsius, arrested this week. It took a while. They've been going through a bankruptcy process for about a year now, a little over a year. He's been showing up to court and all this. He's residing within America. All of a sudden, they decided we're going to get him on a whole bunch of charges. I'm trying to see what it was. So we got 1 count of securities fraud, 2 counts or 1 count of commodities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, more securities fraud, market manipulation, that's the sell token, and then wire fraud. Lots of maximum sentences here. I don't know if you've dug too deep into all this. What do you think is going to be the outcome? Does he have a chance at, surviving any of these charges? His company is bankrupt. I don't know. Maybe he's like SBF and he's got a secret piggy bank somewhere and he's paying off the feds. But I would say a lot less likely for him than SBF. What do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, those are my thoughts. Like, I think that the regulators have to go hard after one of these crypto scammers. So whether it's going to be Celsius or whether it is going to be FTX, it kind of looks as if Sam Bankman-Fried is kind of already in bed with the regulators. How many billions of dollars did he contribute to different political campaigns? And he's obviously got out on bail as well. So I think if they're going to throw the book hard at somebody, SBF looks to be pretty safe and protected. So if I were going to speculate on this, I don't have a strong opinion on the Mashinsky case, but I would think that they would probably actually throw the books at Mashinsky pretty hard, because I haven't seen any connections that he has to government institutions and regulators and politicians like SBF has.
Yeah, I think he was a donor at some point, but you're right. He doesn't have the in that SBF has. I don't think he has dirt on anybody reasonable. Celsius was sort of a siloed Ponzi scheme that didn't involve like a ton of outside investors. I think in Canada, though, one of our pension funds in Quebec invested in Celsius, which is insane. It's insane to me that, like, I get that they don't, they want to get exposure to the space, and maybe it's a little bit harder if you're in America to do it without investing in a company. But we have spot Bitcoin ETFs in Canada. And yet our pension funds, instead of buying a totally legal product, would rather do a private placement in what was undoubtedly a Ponzi scheme. Like the way this guy was going around promising 7-10% yield forever. It's like, no, there's no such thing as 10% yield forever. Like yield is a byproduct of either monetary policy or what the free market is demanding. And there's just like no way to fulfill that long term. The really like the eulogy of Celsius, what I will say is a really interesting thing about Celsius is I don't know about you. Did you have any money in Celsius or no? You never touched it?
No.
Okay. So I personally actually had money in Celsius, and I had a bunch of friends. I signed up into Celsius, and luckily I got them all out. And it was really interesting because Dylan LeClaire, and you might remember back in May when Luna started collapsing, started unraveling all these ties of Celsius to Luna and them using UST or whatever their stablecoin was. That was how they were generating all this yield for the Celsius customers. Like a big chunk of it was coming from the Luna protocol. And I swear, like if I wasn't on Twitter every single day, I would not have been able to escape that, with anything. And it was the same with my friends. And, when you look at things like Quadriga and FTX, they kind of came down and happened all of a sudden overnight, and you didn't really have any time to pull out. But Celsius, like the suspicion on Celsius being insolvent started months in advance. And I thought, at least from my perspective, publicly in the crypto sphere, it felt pretty public that this thing was gonna topple over relatively soon. And it took 4+ weeks to play out. So I feel really badly for the people who got stuck in it, because I think a large reason is that none of the mainstream press was covering this at all. And these guys like Dylan LeClaire and Magoo and the Bitcoin Twitter crowd, Corey from Swan, they were going out and they were on the radio waves every single day that this thing is a scam, calling out Mashinsky. And yet the mainstream news, like CNBC, these like real journalists, they didn't want to have any of it. They didn't want to cover it. They didn't want to bring up those risks. And basically, if that was your news source, you got screwed. And if your news source was Twitter, you made it out alive. So, yeah, it's pretty rough. But it's a good parable for like the importance of citizen journalism.
100%. It's always very interesting that a lot of these people who have attacked Bitcoin over the last couple of years, a lot of their narratives have kind of been false narratives. So it started with Sam Fried. He was attacking Bitcoin's proof of work mining, saying how it's so dirty and we should transition to proof of stake. And we all saw why Sam Bankman-Fried was trying to bash Bitcoin, because he was running a Ponzi scheme trying to generate fiat dollars and fiat yield. And it was the same thing with Mashinsky. He was bashing Bitcoin, but he was bashing Bitcoin self-custody. So he was saying, oh, those evil Bitcoin maximalists, don't listen to them. You're going to lose your Bitcoin if you self-custody it. Trust me and my Ponzi scheme over at Celsius. So I think anybody who kind of hears anti-narratives being thrown at Bitcoin, if that person is trying to sell you a product, I would just, take that with a grain of salt whenever you listen to somebody's narratives, because like you say, a lot of these Bitcoin maximalists, even myself included, I was called toxic, and, I was even called a Neanderthal in 2021 for being Bitcoin only. They said, you're just being toxic. But, all the maximalists like Corey and Magoo have all been proven right in the blow-ups of all of these centralized altcoin projects in 2022 that have lost a lot of people a lot of money. That's the really sad thing. The amount of money and losses that families and hardworking people have after they put their money in what they thought was a well-trusted product. I mean, FTX, they were posted everywhere in the United States. They had their names on billboards. They even had their names on the uniforms of NBA referees and all sorts of different sports teams. So it's really sad, and it's really important we get this Bitcoin-only education out there.
Well, and like people have felt overwhelmed this year by like how much action the SEC has taken towards these companies. But I would say, look, if the cycles repeat themselves, we're going to go into a full-blown mania, and there likely will be another alt season alongside Bitcoin ripping the new highs. It's not going to be the coins you think of today. They'll make up new Ponzi schemes. But we'll fast forward to like 2025 at the pace that they're at in terms of like getting, crypto investor protection out there. It's sad to say, but I think like a lot of this stuff is going to repeat itself in this cycle. And I feel especially bad for the people who got screwed last cycle, who were stuck in some of these things, that they're going to have to go and they're going to see another cycle of this thing going up. Hopefully, the people who didn't lose all their money and are still somewhat invested in this space have learned the importance of self-custody. That was the biggest lesson from all this stuff. Only have like gambling money, I would say, on these centralized exchanges. But yeah, everything else, it's got to be self-custody for sure.
100%.
What's really interesting, you're in Colombia right now, and you're originally from Australia. Where you are, do they have these Bitcoin platforms that are self-custody by default, or is that only like P2P? Because in Canada, we have like Bitcoin Well, Bull Bitcoin, Beaver Bitcoin, these platforms where you wire money in and they don't hold it. They immediately send you the Bitcoin to a Bitcoin address, and they won't even accept your money until you give them an on-chain address. Versus the exchange model where they're holding your fiat, they're holding your crypto, you can pull it out at your leisure. Like a majority of the Bitcoiners, I would say, don't touch exchanges here. They go direct non-custodial Bitcoin buying. Do they have a lot of that in the other places you've traveled to, or is it just more exchanges?
To be honest, I actually haven't looked in my travels in Latin America for that product, because I get paid in Bitcoin. So I don't have any fiat from all of my little side hustles in the Bitcoin space. But
That's
from
awesome.
what yeah, it's nice to get paid in Bitcoin. And I've even convinced all of the people who work for me to get paid in Bitcoin as well. So my life's very easy. I don't need to look into the fiat rails too much. But from my understanding, it would make sense that all of these products have been rolled out in the US and Canada, because that's where the most volume is for Bitcoin buyers.
I got to ask you, so you get paid in Bitcoin. Do you denominate your work in a SAT rate or in a US dollars, and then that's like a fluctuating SAT price?
So it'd be like a US dollar monthly amount, but paid in Bitcoin.
Okay, so the amount of sats you get on every like paycheck is kind of variable, I guess. Okay, interesting. I've always said like eventually one of us is going to have to take the leap and denominate our work in sats. And I said like it works two ways. Like in bull markets, like people are going to like grit their teeth and whine about it, because it's just like, oh my God, your services keep getting more expensive. Like, am I getting more value? But it's just like, hey, like you signed up to work in the Bitcoin space. We got to be examples of denominating our work. Like if I'm, I don't know my sat denominations offhand. Let's just say I'm like 100,000 sats an hour, right? Yeah, that's going to cost a lot in the bull markets, right? If you're getting fiat cash flows. But the upside is that when things are getting rough, you can afford me a little bit more. But I'm waiting. I'm trying to push towards doing denominations for like, when I sell my services or products in sats only. But it's hard when, the wholesale product of your work is still done in fiat, right?
Very difficult. And I think it's only going to become even more difficult to do something like that. I have a little bit of a controversial view, but I think Bitcoin's going to become even more volatile in the next 5 years ahead, which kind of goes counter to most people's narrative. Most people say the institutions are here, so the volatility is going to decrease in Bitcoin. I don't think that's the case. So I think trying to do something like that will become even more difficult.
I think Bitcoin will be more volatile in the next 4 years than it was in the last 4 years, but I still think the trend overall will lower, but we'll see. Yeah, I agree with you. I think this cycle had unusually muted volatility, but we'll go from there. All right. I'm not going to dig into this too much, even though the show headlined with the XRP stuff. But there's this great thread here, and I'll link it down below after the show, from Jason Gottlieb that kind of summarizes the Ripple judgment and this whole thing, why Ripple pumped, and all these crypto companies are giving each other high fives. We can relist shit coins now, and we have this precedent case to reference to back us up. Basically, the court came down and they said, okay, the basic initial sale of Ripple to institutions, that was a security offering. And since that wasn't registered, that violated the Securities Act and the Howey test and all that. Now, the other part of this was that the programmatic sales, so the sales that were done straight to exchanges by insiders, or the third-party trading, so retail just swapping it across exchanges, that's a whole different investment contract. Even though it's the same asset that's being transacted, since the buyers of the Ripple on exchanges, weren't investing into a Ripple common enterprise, and maybe there was reasonable info on that, that's not illegal. So the exchanges are not being held as culpable as Ripple Labs with the initial offering. The other thing was that if people received Ripple as payment for services, maybe sponsors or freelancers or employees of Ripple, they received it sort of like a stock option. That was also not considered a security offering because they weren't investments for money. But then pretty much everything else, revolving the exchange of Ripple was a security offering. So it's kind of this mixed bag of like the SEC didn't get what they wanted. They wanted to classify the asset, all exchange of the asset, as a security offering. And what happened is that some of the obvious ones got triggered, but some of the, I guess, like second party or third party reselling of Ripple is not a security offering. And then it kind of just begs the question, like, well, like, why is it exempted in those circumstances? And then if it's not a security in those circumstances, what is it? Is it a commodity at that point? Is it a currency? I don't know. But the way that the crypto space at large reacted to this was, send Ripple to the moon. Coinbase, they're in this tango with the SEC because the SEC is claiming that they've listed a bunch of these unregistered securities. Now, Coinbase can point to this and say, hey, we're just the broker. We just enable people to exchange these things for fiat. We're not doing pre-sales. We're not necessarily insiders on all these tokens. Our hands are clean, and this is the proof. So from here, what I imagine is going to happen is that this will get escalated to a higher court. They will continue to pursue Ripple. They'll sue them for the things they can sue them on, but they'll push to still get those other things, I think, classified as securities offerings. You've been on live streams all day, my friend. What is your takeaway on this? It's just been all sorts of conversation for the last 48 hours on this.
Yeah, I don't have a big, strong opinion on the Ripple one. I think, like you mentioned, it's only a very small court that actually made this decision, which is awfully interesting. If I was in the crypto space, I certainly wouldn't be using this as any sort of legal precedent. I certainly wouldn't be relisting a whole bunch of altcoins because I think, like the SEC has been relatively clear that, Bitcoin is the only thing that's not a security. So I think Ripple having this small win today, I wouldn't be reading into it too much. I'd still be very cautious if I was in the crypto space.
It's kind of interesting in that sense, though, that like Coinbase and Kraken, I think Gemini, within 5 hours of this verdict, they're like, we're relisting Ripple. It's like, is there really a benefit to do that for them? Like I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. It just seems like it's all risk and very little reward to take that stance of like, aha, we're going to relist this when they're in the middle of like all these prosecutory cases.
It's a great point. I certainly wouldn't be taking that risk. And I didn't actually know that news. Thanks for bringing it up. That's really interesting that they acted so quickly. Within 5 hours, they've already reversed their decision and listing XRP again. That's actually very, very interesting.
It's wild. I'm gonna try and find the post here, but it was, yeah, and they're doing this like showboating. Like, look, this is one of their tweets here. It says W for Ripple, W for the industry, W for builders, W for clear rulebook, W for updating the system. Oh, and XRP is now open for trading. It's like, well, they listed it for a while, and then when this court case started escalating, they delisted it because they didn't want to get their hands dirty. And now this thing comes out about how like it sort of is a security, but not in Coinbase's sense. They're like, F it, like we're going to relist it again. It seems very unprofessional, and Coinbase has spent like a tremendous amount of money courting lobbyists for their cause. And I'm sure that like there are some people that, they just want to list all crypto shit coins as like commodities in Congress. But I think the overwhelming opinion is like, even if you like these things, there should be a registration process, and many of them are securities, whether you like it or not. And to me, it's such a weird tactic to just fully embrace this one case as like a win. But
I think it's a risky tactic driven by greed. I mean, that's what it's all about.
Very greedy, right? And this is the whole thing. Like Coinbase, Coinbase didn't have any. They had altcoins since like 2012 or 2013. Basically, like the first forks of Bitcoin were like Peercoin and Ripple came out in like 2013, 2014. Coinbase was like, no, we're only going to do Bitcoin. And then Ethereum came around, and they actually had to weigh that a little bit before they listed. They took a little while, like months after the Ethereum presale. They were like, okay, we'll maybe list this one. It kind of seems legit. And then no altcoins basically till 2019. And then 2020, they were like, we're going to go public in a year. We got to get the floodgates open. We got to pump those rookie numbers up, all shit coins. And I did a show like 2 weeks ago going over some of the altcoins that you can trade today on Coinbase. And we're talking about things that have maybe $6,000 worth of market liquidity to move it about 10%. So a $6,000 market buy would move some of these coins listed on Coinbase today 10%, as if they really care about their constituency here. It's incredible that they're so adamant about getting these things listed and staying on the exchange. But I don't know.
That sounds fascinating. I'm going to go back and actually watch that video. I knew the altcoins were very illiquid, but I love to have some numbers to back up my talking points. That's amazing.
Was it Brain Trust? Okay, so I this is rehashing all of them. So okay, so check out this website here. You can see it, right?
Yep.
Okay, so this is one of the tokens listed on Coinbase. It's like one of the lowest volume tokens. So it's called Brain Trust. It just looks like it's a talent / recruiting website, right?
Okay.
So clean UI, looks really nice. Future work starts here, yada, yada, yada. You wouldn't guess it's like a cryptocurrency. It just looks like a recruiting website. Look at all these great companies they work with. Oh, Galaxy. I wonder why. Turns out they did a ICO and they have a token for whatever reason. And the idea is that here they have a white paper. And the idea is that if you buy this token, you own a share in a decentralized talent network.
Oh my God.
Yeah, the thing is a complete sham. And then you look at like all the other photos on the website, like they're all stock photos. And Coinbase thinks that like this passes as something we would list on our exchange. And then you go to like the here, we'll look up like the coin market cap of this. Oh, 31 cents. Okay. Well, let's see. What was the all-time high price? Oh, $32. Wow. So 99.99% down. Fully diluted market cap, $78 million. Like this is bigger than quite a few companies that you buy in the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ, right? Circulating supply, 58%. Guess where the other 42% is? In the coffers of some, issuer in Brain Trust. But yeah, 99.34% drawdown. And then Coinbase is like by far the biggest place for the volume. Their market depth has gotten better. Used to be, and it's $6,000 to move it 2% now. So maybe they added some liquidity after I called them out. But
Yeah.
it's wild that they're just like, they're gung-ho about, we got to list all the shit coins, and this passes our test for something acceptable on our exchange. But I don't know. We'll see what the business model is for them in the future, but not bullish.
It tells you everything you need to know. A coin with that kind of background, it shows you how much due diligence all of these exchanges do behind the things that they list on their exchanges.
Yeah. All right. You wrote this thread here, and I'll summarize it really quick, and then you can maybe tell me about how you came up with this and why you think it's important. But essentially, Bitcoin is at an all-time high for over 1 billion people in the world, in countries like Argentina, Nigeria, Venezuela, where their currencies are undergoing massive inflation. Only maybe some of them are technically hyperinflation. Speaking of which, like, small rant, we need like a word that is like in between inflation and hyperinflation, because I think the definition of hyperinflation is like 100% a month. And then if it's not that, it's just regular inflation. We got to have like super inflation, where like if inflation is like month over month, I want to say like double digits, that should be called super inflation. And the powers that be are not going to like that, because that sounds so bad. But we need to have a definition here, because like, even like you're telling me that like a 90% month over month inflation does not constitute as like hyper something or other. Apparently not, by the definition of hyperinflation. So I don't know. We need a better word for the mid-range. But rant aside, you've rightly noted here that Bitcoin is up 35x since March 2020 versus the peso. This is the chart of Bitcoin versus the peso. So on the USD chart, we're around here on this little double top. But in Argentina, we're making new all-time highs. We're surging onwards because their currency is just getting trounced there. And then you got the Venezuelan, that's just like a clean number go up line. I wish BTC USD looked like that. But yeah, like the point is that switch your denominator around and the Bitcoin charts look very different. But yeah, I'm curious. Maybe you can take it away. What was your inspiration behind making this thread?
Yeah, so the BTC USD chart will look like that one day. I just believe it'll be the last chart to look like that, because I'm a little bit of a dollar milkshake maximalist. And I think the US dollar will be the last to hyperinflate or superinflate. I personally love that term, and I think we should create one in the Bitcoin space. And my inspiration for the thread was, everybody has this very, US-centric view of what Bitcoin is. And most people just think it's like a, correlated risk on tech stock, but it's not. In reality, Bitcoin is a lifeboat all around the world, and all of these countries, Bitcoin is at an all-time high, while their local currency has been absolutely evaporated. So like Argentina was one of the charts you pulled up there, and Bitcoin is up 35x since March 2020 in the Argentinian peso. And like Argentina is not a small country. They have 46 million people living in their country, and they're one of the largest economies in Latin America, a place with like 15 to 20 different nations and countries. So Argentina is massive, and Bitcoin is at an all-time high there. Turkey is another country that I referenced in the thread. Turkey, again, is an enormous country. Their airport is like a little hub in the Middle East there. And again, Bitcoin is like 12% away from an all-time high in the Turkish lira. So I think it's going to be really interesting. And you kind of mentioned inflation and superinflation there. In another thread that I've written, I kind of showed that in 2020, there was like 18 countries with inflation above 10%. Then in 2021, it was like 19 countries with superinflation, or inflation above 10% annually. And then in 2022, we have like 90 countries. So that is like a 900% increase in the amount of countries that have inflation above 10%. So like, I believe we're in this kind of different era of Bitcoin. This is the first global inflation spike in the digital age. And I think it's fascinating that Bitcoin is already performing as that lifeboat for all of these other countries around the world.
Yeah. And like, that's, it's so hard like to have these conversations with people who don't get Bitcoin at all. Like the whole lifeboat conversation, you just don't think about it. If you grew up in Canada, US, or Australia, you never think of assets at all like a lifeboat. You just think of it like, this is a way I invest in something. And you don't think, well, part of the reason I'm investing is to escape the currency I'm in. But then, you force people into these situations where you have to change your price tags in your grocery store every like day. Or, the stories out of Germany where, you go into a pub, you pay for your beer before you get it, because by the time you finished it, it'd be a different price. people have not lived this in our modern era. And the people who have, like in Venezuela, and then, you know, going back to Peru and all that, those stories, they have such a hard time breaking out in the mainstream press. People want to talk, when they talk about finance, they want to talk about the glory of, you know, home ownership, business ownership, all this stuff. They don't want to talk about, you know, the millions and billions of people who will never have access to those things because their denominator is getting devalued so quickly that they can't even get into something, right? And so, like, what makes Bitcoin such an effective life raft is that it is this like super fungible, divisible, you know, on ramps and off ramps in basically every country way to protect your money. I think a lot of people have the default assumption that, like, whoa, if someone lives in a hyperinflated country, they can just buy US dollars and then they can just save in US dollars, right? Like, even though it's 7% inflation, that's a bump up. But man, you'd be shocked. Like, it's very, very hard to get US dollars. And like, there's a sprint every single day for people in Argentina to convert their Argentinian salaries and you know, earnings into the US dollar, and they're constantly running out. And you have this whole market of people taking bags of cash down there, and they get to sell it at like much higher rates than the official you know, the government rates for US dollars. So yeah, the lifeboat aspect is so important.
It's a great point. And the point about, you know, people struggling to get their hands on US dollars is something else I talked about in the thread. So like in Nigeria right now, Bitcoin is performing very well. It's not at an all-time high. It's about 20% off an all-time high in the Nigerian Naira. But it is, again, acting as a lifeboat, because in Nigeria, they were the first country in Africa to roll out a CBDC. And everybody who had money in the bank, they've been limited to $125 monthly withdrawals out of the bank. So they're trying to actually convert everybody's life savings into Bitcoin. And you mentioned there, a lot of these countries don't really have the rails. Well, in Nigeria, the government banned all of the rails. So they kicked out all of the Bitcoin exchanges. And it is rumored that, and it's rumored in Nigeria that Bitcoin has somewhere around 30 to 40% penetration and adoption in the country with no rails. So this is all peer-to-peer adoption, and the local CBDC has a 0.3% adoption rate. So it's amazing that Bitcoin is doing things like this in countries all around the world that people don't think about. I mean, Nigeria is a country where there's over 220 million people, and Bitcoin is their only lifeboat because most of them don't have bank accounts or access to US dollars or traditional finance instruments.
Well, and the hard part about this too is, like, let's just say I want to bring Bitcoin to the people of Nigeria. There's no asset I'm going to want from them, right? Like, even if I wasn't a Bitcoin maxi and I just was in the business of exchanging things and arbitraging, there's a massive premium in Nigeria for Bitcoin. Like, even if you put aside the exchange rate between the Nigerian dollar and the US dollar, there's a massive premium there because, well, let's just say I'm a foreigner. I go into a country and I have Bitcoin. I don't want the Nigerian currency. Like, I can't do anything with that outside the country. And you know, God knows the CBDC, I probably can't even accept it technically if they're gonna get rid of banknotes. And so, you know, what else can I take? You know, I would sell my Bitcoin maybe for gold, but like, good luck getting gold out of the country. There's no US dollars. So it's tough. And the only people essentially that can have these businesses are some of the financial companies that can work with the CBDCs or other means and sell people Bitcoin, and then they can, you know, convert it into something they can use within the country. But it's really hard when you have these closed walls to enable people to convert their assets into Bitcoin. But the power of it is, you know, even though the on-ramps and the off-ramps are censorable by the governments, Bitcoin, the protocol isn't. And so what happens is the generosity of people around the world. And I wanted to bring this up really quick because I think it's really important. The generosity of people who are seeing what is going on in these other countries, and the sympathy and the empathy that we have as Bitcoiners towards, you know, these countries with CBDCs and hyperinflation, it's allowing people to escape the system purely through small contributions. And this is a thread here. So in Costa Rica, there is a Bitcoin circular community called Bitcoin Jungle. And I won't go through the whole thread here, but this woman named Estela Aguilar, she started this farmer's market in this town, Uvita. And she was like super quick to onboard and get into the whole Bitcoin spirit of things. She's 74 years old. And she's been through, you know, natural disasters, coups. She's been shot multiple times. while living in Costa Rica. And a couple of weeks ago, she took in a family of Venezuelan migrants. She, fed them, gave them shelter, medicine, and all that. And unfortunately, through, some drug use, they went on a bit of a rampage and they burnt down every single structure on her farm. And, Bitcoin Jungle, the community there that she's contributed so much to, they've put out this post here asking for donations for people to come and try and help her rebuild. Because I mean, imagine that, like losing your whole livelihood and losing it just trying to help people. And so, they've posted these great photos here, and this has been shared 47,000 times in the last 4 hours. Really harrowing stuff, seeing some of this footage here. But with Bitcoin, the money comes in instantly, right? And she can find people within that community who will accept Bitcoin for services, and she can rebuild. And this is an effort that, there's no other technology in the world that could enable this as quickly. Imagine your house burns down. You can't just, in Costa Rica, start a GoFundMe instantly, right? You don't have permission. You don't have the on-ramp, off-ramp with your bank or anything like that. You can do it with Bitcoin. And you're going to see instances in Nigeria and Turkey and all these countries where people use Bitcoin as this tool to transfer value that doesn't need permission. And even though the on-ramps and the off-ramps might not be there, as long as you're on the internet, you know that this thing has value, and someone in your community will accept Bitcoin for service. Even if you can't get Nigerian dollars or whatever from it, someone will help you escape the country, build a house, cook for you, work for you, whatever. You'll find someone that understands Bitcoin and will do work for Bitcoin. So I find that amazing.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story. Funny enough, I actually read it this morning. It come across my feed and I gave it a read, and it's a really sad story about what's happened to the lady, because it looked as if she was selling goods and services in Bitcoin over there in Costa Rica in Bitcoin Jungle. But I suppose what's happening now is just showing how the world is changing as we move into this digital age. It's kind of all about who you know online and whether you use Bitcoin or not. So our traditional legacy institution is breaking down. Less people are trusting the media. And now all of a sudden we have decentralized media, and we also have decentralized money to accompany our decentralized communication. So it's a beautiful thing watching Bitcoin do its thing on the internet.
Yeah. So how much time do you have? We're almost at like 2 Pacific. Did you have to leave around then, or?
I actually do have a hard stop in exactly 7 minutes. I forgot to mention it to you in the intro.
All good. I assume so. I looked forward on your tweets and I was like, man, you're doing this is Luke's like 3rd live stream today. So he's a trooper for coming on. I appreciate it. Okay, we'll skip a story here. ETFs. So everyone's talking about the BlackRock ETF and all that. And I was doing some math and I was trying to figure out, okay, the US is a country of like, I don't know, around 400 million people, 380 or something. They haven't got their spot Bitcoin ETF, but they're trying, and it looks like it's going to be approved this year. And you sent me a link showing that Europe now has, their ETF is coming online. It looks like it's going to debut pretty soon here, 2023. It's probably easier to get that done in Europe. I think Australia now has a Bitcoin ETF. In Canada, we have 5 of them, actually. We have 5 spot Bitcoin ETFs. And so this is like the bull porn hopium thing. I'm trying to figure out, how much Bitcoin is BlackRock going to have to get their hands on to make this like a viable product. And they're going to have to, in my opinion, like most things, when you compare US and Canada, they're going to have to do 10 times what the Canadians have done in order to meet the same amount of demand in the US. So right now in Canada, there's 5 Bitcoin ETFs. Very proud of that. They hold about 58,000 Bitcoin, which is 1 in 350 of every Bitcoin in existence. MicroStrategy has about 1 in 120 Bitcoin in all of existence. And then I think the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, they have 3%. So 1 in like 33 of all the Bitcoin in the entire world. And so this BlackRock spot Bitcoin ETF product, you got to think it's got to be at least as big as the Grayscale one. How are they going to accumulate 600,000 plus Bitcoin from us hodlers who have held through 70, 80% drawdowns? How are they going to do it? And it's not like the futures thing where they can just make it paper. They have to prove to the regulators that they own this spot Bitcoin, and they likely have to buy it from Coinbase. And we know that there's only like 1 million Bitcoin on exchanges, and you are going to be buying 600 plus thousand, and that's just one of these spot ETFs. I mean, this was your controversial opinion, right? That you think that this cycle will be much more volatile than the next. I think the math plays in your favor in this. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think Bitcoin's seen something we've never seen before in human history. It's actually seen three things. So Bitcoin's hitting an all-time high in hash rates in what's supposed to be the end of a bear market. Typically, that doesn't happen. Normally, price follows hash or hash follows price. So somebody's mining a lot of Bitcoin in this bear market. That's interesting. Something else that's never happened before is the fact that we're watching a 3-year supply suffocation. So for the first 10 years of Bitcoin's life, coins were sent to exchanges. So you could actually see on a chart the amount of Bitcoins on exchanges was only ever increasing until 2020. March 2020 came along, and all of a sudden, coins on exchanges for the past 3 years have actually decreased by 1 million coins. So we've seen a shift in how Bitcoin is actually being treated on exchanges. And for the first time in human history, we actually have institutional demand actually coming into the space. There's been lots of rumors. In 2017, when I first got in, everybody was talking about Backed and the Backed ETF that never got off the ground. But today we have the world's largest and the world's second largest asset managers, BlackRock and Vanguard, just filed for a Bitcoin ETF in the past 2 weeks. So I think I've kind of had the opinion for at least the past 2 to 3 years that a day pretty soon, you're going to watch Bitcoin do something in a bull run that most people are going to be very surprised by. So I think everybody's talking about a super cycle. And I actually thought we would see a super cycle in 2021. I said there's at least a 30 to 40% chance that we overshoot stock to flows plan B model that he had in 2021. And I was obviously wrong, but I still think the day is coming where Bitcoin does do something very interesting, and all of these cycles and models predicting what Bitcoin are going to do are going to break. So we have like the diminishing returns theory about Bitcoin, you have the rainbow chart, and everybody thinks Bitcoin's just going to top at 150K next cycle. And I just don't think that's going to happen because of the supply shock that is going on today.
And we have to realize, like, this was programmed into Bitcoin from the start. So Bitcoin has these halvings every 4 years where the supply that the miners are basically putting out onto the market is getting cut in half. And essentially, for the first 20 years, the block reward is over 1 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. But, you know, by the end of that 20 years, 99% of all the Bitcoin is mined. And then for the next 80 to 100 years, you're fighting over the last 1% that hasn't been mined yet. And so from the start, like, Bitcoin's design was so that supply could sort of meet whatever perceptible demand. But we're entering a territory in the next 20 years where supply is going to be stuck really, really hard. It's going to be stuck in ETFs. It's going to be stuck with these hardcore hodlers. And it's going to be stuck in the wallets that have, you know, lost their private keys lost. The supply is like, it's done. It's not really at all inflationary anymore. At this point, you know, and you meet that hard cap at 21 million, 16 million, whatever you want to call it, in the face of, you know, as much demand as humans have for a better money, right? And so again, like, that's why I agree with you that, like, it will accelerate tremendously fast at some point as people realize if we want to move to this system, we got to get our slice. And like, people have this cliched thing that there's, like, you know, 50 million millionaires and 21 million Bitcoin. Doesn't seem to matter. What do all these millionaires own if they don't own, you know, at least a 1% allocation in Bitcoin? I don't know. But people are going to get left behind. And so it's going to give Bitcoiners and people who are psychopaths like we are a lot of power to kind of, you know, dictate where the world goes if this becomes the money. And that's why I think it's so important that we continue to educate one another on the state of the world. And that's why I'm so happy that, like, so many Bitcoiners like yourself are so curious and, you know, putting their life on the line for things and are trying to include people. Like, if we're going to have this much power one day, and it's not that I'm in it for the power, we need to be responsible, and we need to be caring, and we need to be positive about the future. And I can't think of a better community than Bitcoiners right now. And we're only going to hopefully become better as humans to execute on that and move forward. So you got to leave, Luke. You got about 30 seconds here if you want to put in a last word.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I've heard somebody call Bitcoin the final Cantillon effect. I think it might have been American Hodl who said that. But essentially, as we transition onto the Bitcoin standard, moving forward into the future, the only way that you can be rich is you have to actually provide value. So I think it's a beautiful thing. And I think a lot of the morals and the, you know, the ethics in the Bitcoin community are actually in a very good place. And I think interacting with the Bitcoin community, you're going to find very quickly that Bitcoiners aren't really toxic. They actually want the best for you. They want to teach you about things, and they want to show you how you can succeed in life and actually upgrade your life. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute blast. I've watched your channel since I think you had around 2,000 subs on YouTube. So you definitely deserve all the success you're getting. So I'm just honored to be on your channel today.
Cool, man. Well, thanks so much for coming on. We got to do this again sometime. This has been a blast. Time's just ripping here.
Absolutely.
All right, take care. Good luck. You can find Luke on Twitter. I'll put his link after the show, and you can catch him on all the other live shows he's been on. He's fantastic.
Thank you so much. See you guys. I hope you all have a good day.
Take care. All right. I'll cover a couple more things here, but that was great. It's fun doing these shows with other people because sometimes it's daunting on my own. You might have noticed my voice is like going. I've just had this weird tingle of a sore throat for the last 4 days. Then all of a sudden, the one day I have to talk for like an hour straight, it's just like, we're going to ramp it up today. So is what it is. Praveen here asks, when an ETF provider buys spot Bitcoin for issuing ETFs, will the Bitcoin be locked in a multi-sig, or will it be lent out to DSG or the Winklevi for leverage? So that's a really good question. I think the only way you can find an answer to that is to look at what has been done with the gold ETFs, because I believe that the spot gold ETFs, they have to hold physical gold. And the question is like, well, can they lend that out? Can it be partially collateralized, lent out, and moved around and used for other things? I'm not sure. I really don't know if gold ETFs have to be 100% collateralized one for one. Bitcoin ETFs are entering, of course, like a new territory. So I really don't know how these things work, but that's a very good question, because I think that if Bitcoin in these official ETFs can be rehypothecated, it can be used to suppress the Bitcoin price and create this sort of like paper Bitcoin effect. So ultimately, we don't have any say over that, except for the fact that we can hold our Bitcoin in cold storage and just make sure that BlackRock doesn't get any of our Bitcoin in the coming months as they prepare to launch their ETF. If the daisy chain happens, then BlackRock buying Bitcoin would be a boss attack on price. I don't know what the daisy chain is. Might have to message me and explain that, and then maybe we could go over it in another show. I don't think I know what that concept is right now. All right. A couple more little economic things to go over, and then we'll wrap up the show. Number one is Biden. Joey Biden this week just announced that he's going to be forgiving about 800,000 people who are still paying back student loans. So you might remember last week they announced that, or the Supreme Court announced that they didn't approve this idea of student loan forgiveness. And that, the federal government responded, we're going to figure out a different way to do it. And so right now what they're doing is there is a law that enables them to forgive the student loans of people who have been paying them back for 20 to 25 years. So if you have a balance of student loans after paying them off for 20 to 25 years, that's pretty awful. That sucks. That's a big part of the American school system. But now, if you're one of the 800,000 people that is still paying off your student loans after that long, you're going to get the rest of the balance completely forgiven. And it's going to cost $39 billion. And apparently the federal government can do that. But this is going to become a really big issue for the election. And the Democrats are going to use it and weaponize it against Republicans. Republicans don't care about like the youth. They're saddling them with debt. But again, we live in this society where people are excused of responsibility. And I understand that student loans can be looked at as a form of predatory lending, right? But you have to look at who's the predator here. Like, is it the schools that are forcing people to come to them? Who is the predator forcing people to take on student loans? Is it society? Is it the governments telling people you got to do it in order to get a good paying job? Is it the parents? It's hard, because when I think of predatory lending, I think of, here are institutions that are charging 200, 300% with opaque terms, and they're taking advantage of you, but you kind of have to sign up for it and read the dotted line. But it's very much like one institution that you kind of blame for these things. When it comes to student loans, it's like a demon, right? Like, it's your parents forcing you into it. It's the government telling you got to do it. It's tech companies telling you, you got to have 4 years and a degree to get the job here. And I would hope, and I think I'm noticing it a little bit, that slowly we're trying to get away from this. Luke said he just dropped out of school to pursue a career in Bitcoin. And none of the Bitcoin companies, very few of them will say you need to, have a 4-year degree to be director of marketing or, a coder. You just have to prove your competency and your merit. And you're starting to see companies like Google and Tesla say, we don't need you to have a degree. You just have to pass our competency test in order to get a job here. So I think corporations are doing the right job now. I think they were one of the first purveyors of like, you have to have a degree in order to, get a job and make it. And they were sort of one of the predators here. But I think corporate America and corporations around the world, they're becoming the first people to kind of undo that train of thought. And then what you're left with is you're left with governments who are telling people, go to school. And it doesn't make it any better when governments tell people that we'll just excuse all your loans too now. So go get them. They'll eventually be excused down the road. They're just goading people to go to school. Like, why wouldn't I go to school for 4 years and have all my expenses paid for and then have the good chance of a Democrat's in office and just waives all of it? It's like a 4-year learning vacation for a lot of these kids. And I can attest to it. I mean, like I was in university as well. 4 years. You'll have exams and hard stuff, but we're talking about liberal arts and having a full ride from the federal government on your loans. It's a vacation. It's not as efficient of a way of learning as self-paced education. And I don't know, that's all I can say. But you also have parents who are pushing this too on their kids. Like it's become like a boomer thing. You got to go to university. The dawn of the great American university really flourished in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. And of course, the parents of today's children, are going to say, follow your passion and do the same thing. So Praveen here says, if Biden can waive my home loan, I will vote for him too. Hey, I think that's next. Canada has been doing that by trying to extend amortization periods to 90 years. So that's essentially the government saying, don't worry about it. You can die with your mortgage. Like someone will figure it out. We'll take it off your hands if you die. So yeah, I always wonder about that. If you die and you have a mortgage, who takes on the debt? The government just gets the house? I don't know. That's why they don't give mortgages out to people over 70 as easily as they do to people who are in their 30s or 40s. But if we're going to have 90-year amortization periods, I don't know. All right. Some quick data points, some things to think about here. Being in Canada, this is a chart of Canadian employment, and the blue line represents public sector jobs, and public sector is basically just working for the government. So whether you're a teacher, whether you're a healthcare worker, whether you work in a tax office, if you are employed by the government of Canada or the provincial government or the state government, that's the blue line. So job numbers going up. This red line is self-employed people, AKA, I would say, entrepreneurs. And this line, if you look at it, there's been almost no growth in self-employment and, I would arguably say entrepreneurship in Canada for the last 20, 25 years. It's basically where it was back in the late 90s, where the internet bubble was. But we've seen a massive, massive uptick since COVID, this little dip and then the rip here in public sector jobs. So I ask you, have you gotten more out of your government in the last 2-3 years? Do you feel like it's been worthwhile for them to hire as many people as they have? There's a comment here saying that you don't want healthcare workers, services like health card, transportation, cleaning. Maybe it makes sense that there's a big uptick in public sector workers because we have so many elderly people and a lot of them fall under public guardianship, right? I would argue that accounts for some of it. You're seeing a lot of people work in the healthcare space. That number's taking up quite a bit. But ultimately, when you get a job in the public sector, you don't lose that job. No matter how rough the economic circumstances are, you don't lose those positions. People who work in the public sector, they can work basically forever unless they say something bad. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's good to have a job that provides you security for the rest of your life. But you got to ask yourself, is all of this uptick in public sector employment all just taking care of older people? Or are there a lot of bureaucrats that are getting jobs that are doing things that are not really that inducive or productive, who have those jobs and are doing those instead of being in the general economy? Because ultimately, if the government runs out of money, they just print more and you get employed. But if you work in the private sector, if your company runs out of money, you lose your job. And while that sounds rough, that is the way of the world most of the time. And so you keeping your job is not contingent on everyone else losing purchasing power when you're working in the private markets. So I don't know. I don't like the trajectory of everyone working for the government. To me, that sounds like slavery in some way. Maybe radical, but that's just the way I see it sometimes. What else here? There's one more chart. No, I think that's it for the day, actually. Liquid Death. I'm curious if anyone here drinks this stuff. So this is a sparkling water / just regular water company. And they just put water in cans, and they make these really cool cans. And then they sell it. And you can probably get it in 7-Eleven or whatever. This company now is valued at, I think, $1 billion+. And it's kind of, it's almost like one of those fiat things, like, oh man, like, of course, in a fiat world, does a company that puts water in a can, reach $1 billion worth of value and sells the can for like $4. But it's also, to me, interesting because it's an exercise in viral marketing. And so anybody can put water on a can. Anybody can pay a Fiverr artist to do some cool metal artwork, but they've taken this company off of this novel concept and built this really interesting brand around it. Not on the back of like celebrities either. They've just done this organically. And yeah, it's really interesting. And now they're looking to IPO in the next year. But this is a really good case study. Might make for an interesting video one day, but look it up, Liquid Death. If anyone's tried it, let me know. But yeah, we had a quick poll. We're going to look at that. And then I'm going to head out for the day. My throat is about to explode out of my body. So I asked you guys, was the XRP court ruling a big deal? And 36% of you said yes, it's going to lead to crypto making a comeback. 40% of you said maybe, yet to see. I think this week's price action falls in the maybe category. And then 27% of you said no, it's a nothing burger. So I would say most people are like cautiously optimistic that it will have an impact on more money coming into this space. And I would say I kind of agree with that. I think it's going to make the SEC's job a lot harder because they didn't get that decisive victory that they were looking for just calling calling Ripple a security. Does it impact Bitcoin? No, because Bitcoin is just not a security. But it's to me a gasping breath of like the gasping breaths that I am taking right now from the altcoin space to find a sign of life. And I think they're latching onto that as strong as they can. But ultimately, if you have seen the bigger picture in Bitcoin, you know that the altcoins that make it every cycle are different, with the exception of Ethereum, maybe. That's now been like second place for, I don't know, 10 years. The other things that you see in the top 10 are rarely that. They come out of nowhere, they become huge phenomena, and they drop 90%. And then next cycle, they're nowhere to be found. So again, long-term investing, this doesn't really change anything for cryptocurrencies. It just makes it possible for these companies to stall with SEC enforcement a little bit longer. They have a little bit of precedent now on their side. But ultimately, Bitcoin is the thing that's changing the world. Bitcoin has the largest addressable market cap out of all these. And it's the reason I'm here. And it's the reason that I continue to make these videos, sore throat and all. And the reason that I think we have to look forward to the future. I think the people that I talk to every day, the people I have the pleasure of bringing up on this show, the people I have the opportunity to interview for my medium videos or my short videos or whatever, they are all optimistic about the future. They're all having kids in their 20s and 30s. Some of them are well off. Some of them are not well off. But you only do that sort of thing because you're positive about the future. And Bitcoin is giving that to people. And in a world where there's so many things to not be positive about, where global warming is the top reason for millennials to not have kids, to have something as powerful as the evolution of money in our lifetime to kind of circle around and build a community and build purpose, this is a once in a generation thing and technology that people are going to use to be optimistic about the future. And I'm so stoked every day I get to wake up and be a part of that. It's awesome to live in this time, and it can be very trying and tough, but it's awesome to be a part of doing this. And everyone has something to contribute, even if you don't think you do, even if you just hodl, you don't want to put your face out there. That's fine. We all are contributing in our own way. And we're going to keep doing it. And the price ultimately will not matter 10, 20, 30 years from now, because we'll have done the right thing. And Bitcoin will be a standard that is the life raft for so many people. So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. And I'll catch you next week. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.